What we're going to do now is have a panel discussion for the next half hour, maybe 45 minutes. We'll probably stretch it a bit. We have some very clever people up here. Somehow or other, nearly all men. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, all these people know things about stuff. But what I'm going to do, first of all, is just ask everybody up here to state concisely and clearly, in 1 minute or less, what they would do if they had the chance and you could change the drug laws. If there was one thing you could do to change the cannabis laws, what would that be? But first of all, Greg, your 1 minute of fame, kind of, starts now.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether the introduction, whether I'm to the left or the right of yourself. I'm probably to the left of most people on this issue at least. Look, what would I do, I guess, to legalise or at least to change the marijuana laws? The first thing I'd do is demonise the drug and run a campaign to re-educate the public. It starts with the 1961 UN Convention on Narcotics, which classifies marijuana as a narcotic, which at first is incorrect in a medical sense, but of no medicinal value. And there goes the second thing I do, and I think this is very important to the approach, that we de-demonise the drug by opening people's minds to the medical value of it as a drug. And then secondarily, we certainly open up the hearts and minds of people that there is a recreational use for marijuana, and that the only way we can really save children, our children, from addiction is by being honest and open about marijuana as a recreational drug, the same way perhaps alcohol is considered an acceptable recreational drug. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Most people heard my thoughts on this earlier, so I won't spend too much time except to say I think we've got to get medicinal cannabis over the line. I think we've got a unique window right now to do that, and I'm hopeful that we'll get a change to the law this year.
I think in answering this question, I'll be mostly summarising things I said previously. I think that the first thing that we should be doing is to stop criminalising the users of all drugs. I completely support regulation of cannabis. I think that that's essential, but I think that it's also the case that there are still substantial obstacles to regulation of cannabis in Australia. The primary ones being the United Nations conventions and the lack of popular support for regulation. People right now are ready to support ending the criminalisation of drug users, and we can move that whole issue out of the policy discussion and then just focus on how do we regulate cannabis and or other illicit drugs.
Thank you, Will.
I'm going to describe what a Wodak government will do in the first 100 days of our first term. And there are a couple of principles. Firstly is it's important to talk about where we want to end up, but almost all reform in politics is slow and incremental, and we mustn't forget that. Reform is a process, it's rarely an event. So it's very important to talk about baby steps. You scare people when you mainly concentrate on where you want to end up. I think we all want to end up in a very similar place, that is cannabis being available in a taxed and regulated form, and I think the matter of getting rid of the criminal sanctions will also have to be done slowly by raising the thresholds at where the criminal justice system starts to act, and also reducing the severity of the penalties. And I think we're not going to get there if we talk about doing this overnight. This is not a sort of discussion session, but I have a very different view on the relevance of the 3 international treaties, especially the 61 treaty in relation to cannabis. I think I've always thought that these are paper tigers, and I think the events of what's happening in Uruguay with the lack of any response to what Uruguay is doing bears that out. I think we can disregard the single convention on cannabis and there'll be no negative repercussions.
Well, when the New South Wales Greens seize power in New South Wales, we'll do 3 things. We'll legalise cannabis, we'll regulate cannabis, and we'll tax cannabis. And that's got to be the future, I think. I think in doing that, we should just take the step. We should courageously take the step and stare down the US. They're not going to do a trade boycott on us if we go and take the steps that most of their states want to be taking anyhow. I think it's time to get over the messing around in the shallows to some degree. Our policy is very clear here in New South Wales. Legalise, regulate and tax it. And I've got to tell you, once the revenue starts coming into state governments, they'll be as addicted to it as anything else.
Good points, David. Good points. In Damon's world, I will remove 78 years of perpetuating bullshit and prohibition that's been being taught to every generation that goes through school, and re-educate everyone with evidence-based science and lived experience as opposed to anecdotal experience.
I want to live in your world. I like Damon's world. Also, I mean, as with David and the Australian Sex Party, and in my aspirational world, I wouldn't be taking little steps. I would be introducing a regulatory model for cannabis that was licensed, regulated and taxed. I would also allow for home growth, the same as we allow for home brewing or growing your own tomatoes. You should be allowed to grow your own cannabis. And I would see that a regulatory model that, yes, may become addictive tax-wise would be a great thing, because if we recognise what at the moment one of the taxes that our country is addicted to, it's tobacco tax.
I feel we don't live in the dark ages anymore, and hence we should equate our policy to evidence. So we shouldn't have policy based on moralistic values. We should have policy based on scientific evidence. So it basically sums up everybody else's approach. If we followed evidence, we wouldn't have to make those little incremental changes.
Thank you, everybody. It's interesting how much diversity and unity there is, I suppose, at the same time. So we're all on the same page, kind of, but not necessarily the same page. That's terrific. Look, just housekeeping. I'm hoping someone, Kathleen or someone's got a microphone. Yes, we do. No, we don't. I've got a microphone. That's better. So we're just going to throw it over to the floor. If we can use microphones, that's great. If you want to ask a question, make a comment, please do, but please use the microphone. This is a lovely hall, but it's a little bit bad acoustic-wise if you don't use the mic. Question, comment, whatever you want to say, and we will respond or not.
What do the panel know about the proposed trials, medicinal cannabis trials in Queensland, Victoria and New South Wales? And are you all committed to following through on this? Because trials have often been used in the past as a delaying tactic so that the government of the day doesn't need to act on cannabis reform.
Think they're lining up to answer, David?
Well, I think in many ways those trials were put forward by the New South Wales Premier leading up to the state election as a way of avoiding taking the legislative step of legislating for medicinal cannabis. And I think it's a delaying tactic from Conservatives. That being said, I think we need to engage with it. Trials, if they're done properly with any sort of integrity, will almost certainly provide a solid evidentiary basis upon which to roll out medicinal cannabis. I'm genuinely troubled that they will have such a tight threshold to enter. There'll have to be terminal illness, last stage terminal illness, extreme pain. I'm worried that that's the direction those trials will take, and we'll get pretend opening up for medicinal cannabis. But I do think we need to engage with it. I'm sure the evidence will support medicinal cannabis, and that should be, I think as Richard might have said earlier, that's the low-hanging political fruit that we have to actually seize at the moment.
I'm involved in one of the bids, and I'm involved in the one to do with severe weight loss and loss of appetite in people with advanced cancer. From the outset, I must say that my priority is getting treatment started for people who need it in conditions where there is good evidence that they're likely to benefit. That's my priority. It's not research, but like Richard, I'm not opposed to research, of course. Having been involved in the discussions about the trial that I mentioned, I must say I'm very impressed that these trials are going to provide a lot of benefit for us in ways that I hadn't anticipated. It'll clear up a lot of policy questions for us, which we hadn't even begun to think about. That is the administration of cannabis within hospitals where smoking is banned, that sort of thing. Cannabis won't be administered in these trials by smoking, but nevertheless that question will rise up. Safety for staff, safety for patients, some questions that I'd never even thought of. I'm sure that we will get, some of the trialists will want to have botanical leaf cannabis heated and inhaled, vaporised, and I'm sure that, I'm confident now, I wasn't at the beginning, that they'll be allowed to do that. And I think one of the great benefits of these trials, again something I hadn't really anticipated, is that you'll have a group of people around the country who really have had their eyes open to how important this is and who know a hell of a lot about it and who will be very articulate and well-informed advocates for medicinal cannabis for years to come. And I think that's, that will change the debate about medicinal cannabis in this country to a great extent, and I welcome that.
Look, I was, I support research at any level. I was disappointed when I heard our Premier Daniel Andrews announce that children would be allowed onto these trials in 2016, when he'd also promised that by December 2015, children would be able to access medicinal cannabis. So it seemed to me, again, it was another delay tactic, and I kind of thought, well, why is he making this announcement? If the kids are going to be able to have it in 2015 anyway, why is this some great announcement that in 2016 they'll be able to access a trial? So I am very nervous that at the end of this year, at the end of our Victorian Law Reform Commission inquiry, we will see these trials used as a way of delaying the implementations of those recommendations.
Thank you. If anyone else wants to speak from the top, any other comments, questions?
Thank you, everyone, for being up there. My name's Edel and I'm from South Australia. I notice there's no one up there from South Australia.
I am.
Oh,
Hi.
fantastic. Hi.
From Tasmania, though.
Tasmania. South Australia used to have some of the most liberal laws around cannabis use for many years, and that's really changed a lot. But I think cannabis, on any level, whether it's recreational or medicinal, is one of the biggest social justice issues of our time. I've come to experience the medical profession for a cancer diagnosis over 12 months ago and decided to choose the cannabis path. They told me I'd be dead a year ago. Well, I'm still here, illegally healing myself, and I'd really like to know what we're going to do on a federal level to really get this thing moving, because I'm saving the taxpayers a hell of a lot of money because I'm not engaged in the medical profession and I'm healing and treating myself. So I think there has to be, it needs to be looked at more on a federal level than on a state-by-state level.
I might ask Richard and Greg to comment.
I couldn't agree more, and that's why we've got the legislation before the Parliament. There are a whole lot of aspects to this. We're talking the state trials. One of the just practical hurdles with the states running their own trials is this sort of dog's breakfast of regulation that exists in this area, and just having the regulator in place to facilitate research is really important. Having a body that's responsible for training medical professionals in the use of cannabis and the indications for cannabis is critical. So there's a whole lot of things that need to happen. That's the whole point of having a separate regulator. You're not going to get anywhere until you've got an expert body that's set up, that's established, with a mandate to provide that sort of education, to provide a national framework for the research that needs to occur, and that's the whole point of this legislation. So, it's designed in a way specifically to deal with people like you, so that you don't, at the moment, what you're doing is illegal, you're subject to criminal sanctions, you don't know what you're getting, you don't know about the ratio of the various cannabinoids in what you're getting access to. All of those things, we've got to move beyond that. And if we're going to be able to unlock the potential of this, then the only way to do that is to get the quality control in place, to get a national framework in place, and to make sure that we We do all that in a way that brings the medical community with us, and that they become, again, very strong advocates for the use of this product.
Can I just add to that? We keep hearing the word trials, and I totally agree, but these trials have been going on for over 30 years, not necessarily in Australia, but in many countries overseas. There's been many trials done, Israel, Spain, and also United States. We're seeing the evidence. And can we not jump on the back of that rather than having to start from scratch our end?
Again, absolutely. And we need to do that. And we should have the two pathways running in parallel. My view is that we get this national regulator running off the ground. We provide treatment for those people for those conditions where we know there's very strong evidence, but we also help further research because there are a whole range of areas that we know have got great potential. So we've got to have the two pathways running in parallel. I'm like others have expressed that view. I do have concerns about using the state trials as a way of delaying concrete action. We can't let that happen. We've got to make sure that the treatment's available to people once this regulator's set up. We know those conditions. The people in Australia aren't different to people in the UK or the US or in Israel, in terms of their response to this. So we've got very good evidence already. We have good evidence. So for those conditions where the evidence is clear, let's make it available, but use the framework to facilitate the trials at a national level. And at the moment, you've got different states working out how to conduct the trials, going down different routes, and that's the point of having that national legislation. It brings the whole thing together.
Hi, thanks, Ness. Now, I'm not sure if you were asking specifically about medical marijuana, but I'll pose an answer in terms of recreational and medical marijuana, because I see one as a subset of the other. And as I said in the introduction there, ironically, the 1961 UN Convention on Narcotics does label marijuana as a narcotic with no therapeutic value. So this was a complete demonisation of the drug that we, as minions of America, did initiate those conventions in the United Nations, have gone just blindly into this idiocy. And there's absolutely no other way to couch it. And I love the way you said it as one of the great social issues of our time. I can see no other way that this issue won't be judged by history on the same level as perhaps slavery was judged, as perhaps the persecution of homosexuals will be judged, as the disenfranchisement of women is judged. It's because we have a law, a persecution of a minority that, for heaven's sake, is 10% of the population regularly smokes marijuana for medicinal or other purposes. And this is an obscenity. And this is where I'd perhaps, really like to say, how can it get this far? 40 years. I'm 60 years old. I lie, I'm 59 years old. Seems like yesterday, but at any rate, at university, I was caught up in the marijuana movement and thought, look, 5 years, this thing will work itself out, it'll be legal. And here I am 40 years later with the same shit going on. We've got people being bloody busted, we've got dogs at festivals sniffing kids' groins for a bit of pot. It is an obscenity. Now, my point is that I think we, the people in this room that get the point, my generation has got to poke our bloody heads out the window and say enough is enough, like that Jack Lemmon, and I'll show my age here, movie, where he says, I'm mad as hell and I've had it. Well, I really think that's what we need to do. And this is where the Drug Law Reform Party is trying to make some points and get some grounds to give this debate some legitimacy, to point out that it is wrong at every level to be persecuting people for an action that in actual fact does no other person harm except the person consuming the sustenance. It's about the same as masturbation, who's hurt? So, look, I'll leave it there, but I could not agree, and I appreciate you. I do want to infuse some passion in this issue, which is what we're here in Nimbin about, what we were in Melbourne only last weekend with Fiona, waving the flag at the 4:20 rally at 20 past 4 on the 20th of November in a form of civil protest, waving the flag, saying, to the governments, that those who will look to the media, that this is wrong, and we're not going to take it any longer.
Bit of fire, always good. Anyone else on the panel, or otherwise anyone on the floor?
Hello? You just want to comment about the clinical trials. Clinical trials can have to be done in Australia to approve an Australian product on the Australian market. Tony Abbott is about to change that, probably with different reasons in mind, but it will actually benefit in the future that we can actually register products in Australia that have had trials overseas, but until now that hasn't been possible. It can only be used as supporting evidence, not as actual safety guarantee.
Thanks, Torsten. David down the front, I've got a mic. Oh, sorry, the person at the back first of all, sorry.
I've just come in. I'd like to hear you speak about race relations and how it's connected to the prohibition. It seems like America's exploding in every city, and the attachment to the idea of cannabis being, the black person's choice has been a long connection to that, and the fear that people seem to attach subconsciously and put out that connects the two. Can anyone speak about that, or is that too big a topic?
That's not too big a topic. I might talk about it through the context of drug dogs, for example. You see a number of US studies that show what's meant to be a non-discriminatory search method, whether a dog has a positive or a negative indication, seriously skewed by what's called handler bias. And in the US, you'll see a substantial overrepresentation of false positives against, say, Hispanic drivers or black drivers. And the dog is picking up upon the inherent bias, often unrecognised by the officer, the racial bias of the officer, who gives the dog subconsciously a very positive response when the dog identifies a young black man or a young Hispanic man as having drugs, and a much less positive response when the dog identifies a nice white middle-class bloke in a suit with drugs. And taking it to a New South Wales perspective, we've studied the figures for drug dog operations by the New South Wales Police. And for example, in the Transport Command, there's been a massive expansion of drug dog operations on the Sydney, Newcastle and Wollongong public transport network. And that is obviously targeted primarily at younger people and at the demographics that use public transport. And there's a vastly higher false positive rate by the drug dogs on public transport. And when you dig down further, in the Sydney rail network, a customer going through Redfern railway station is 6.5 times more likely to be the subject of a drug dog search than a customer going through King's Cross or Central or Town Hall or any of the other city railway stations. What's special about Redfern? Well, first of all, you've got a lot of young people and students, but secondly, you've got one of Sydney's largest Aboriginal populations. And it's no surprise again that we see not just handler bias in the false positives, but that bias in the way that policing is used against young people and marginal groups, and in New South Wales, particularly Aboriginal people.
Race and social and economic disadvantage are very important factors in both the origin and also the implementation of our drug laws, not only in Australia, but also around the world. In Australia, our first drug laws were in South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales, and they banned the smoking of opium, and this was before Federation. Similar laws were passed around about the same time in California and also in British Columbia and Canada. And what those 5 jurisdictions had all in common was that they had goldfields and they had Chinese on the goldfields smoking opium. And the first laws passed in those 5 jurisdictions against drugs only banned the smoking of opium, which was only smoked by Chinese people. So there was clearly a very strong racial origin to the laws. Implementation, work done by Harry Levine in New York, has shown that although the prevalence of cannabis use, marijuana use as it's called in the United States, is very similar among white, Hispanic and African American people, in fact slightly higher among white people, that the Hispanics have, adjusting for population size, a 4 times higher rate of arrest in New York City, and a 7 times higher rate in African American people. And those figures have been replicated right across the United States and also in Europe. And of course, the close connection between race and social economic disadvantage as well. And we shouldn't leave out the social and economic disadvantage as well. This is very much a way in which older, white, wealthier people control young, poor, and often black people.
Just on that as well, from my experience in Adelaide's northern suburbs as a police officer, there's not so much racial profiling as it is socio-economic profiling. We would get the good stats by going to the shitty suburbs where they had the crime. We wouldn't get the stats by driving around places like Unley, which is like a nice eastern suburb in leafy Adelaide. So we're sort of going around the wrong circle with it.
Although that being said, if you want to pick up drug crime, to have a Sydney perspective, I think you'd be more likely to pick up significant drug crime in the well-heeled eastern suburbs or in the toilets of merchant banks than you probably would be on the public transport network at Redfern Station. But, you know, one gets a heavy policing presence and one doesn't.
I just wanted to make a comment, I guess tying this back to the question of regulation of cannabis. So this issue which has come up twice now of social justice, and just by telling a quick story. So I grew up, I had a kind of privileged upbringing. I went to an expensive kind of school. Didn't really use any illicit drugs at school, but when I left, I was surprised by how often I bumped into people I went to school with off their heads in the nightclubs of Sydney. Rich kids use lots of drugs. Now, I'm a researcher and I have the stats now to back that up. It is true, as you step up the economic quintiles, illicit drug use becomes more common. I live in King's Cross in Sydney, and one of the things that really strikes me about living in that area is how clear it is that the street, as we hear about the street when people talk about drugs, that's a phenomenon of poor and marginalised people's drug use. I don't buy my drugs on the street. People who buy their drugs on the street have a high prevalence of homelessness, mental health issues, and all sorts of other sorts of social disadvantage. And one of the concerns to me is that if the regulation of cannabis were the only reform that we were to enact, and it's not going to be, but let's just do a hypothetical, by bringing one drug over from the side of prohibition onto the side of, the right side of the drug apartheid, isn't going to break down all those social injustice that comes with the criminalisation of drug users like we have right now. And that's why one of the other reasons why I really want to promote this idea that yes, the regulation of cannabis is essential, but let's not pretend that the status quo of drug prohibition is something we want to recreate with just one drug on the other side. We have to undo that system of criminalising people for using drugs.
Thank you, Will. Is anyone else up the front? David, down the front, have you got a microphone?
Yeah, hello. Is your name David from the Greens Party? Yeah. I just wanted to say that I've come up here because I just wanted to mention that I got a couple of articles out of the medical literature, and it says about cannabis that with a higher cannabidiol content while still having the THC in it. The research that had been done on it from these two articles in the medical literature is that there's no psychotic sort of episode, schizophrenia, and there's no short-term memory impairment. From these two articles, we can determine that from that research that the real issue here is overbreed of cannabis, because the THC content is double that of what it was in the 60s. That's my first issue, and I'd like to give you this article, these two articles, because I've actually got them on paper. The other issue is to do with religious freedom. I've been a born-again Christian since I was 12 years old, and I've been wondering whether it's actually in the Bible, cannabis. You're about to hear something you've never heard before, because I've never read it anywhere. I figured it out myself. So one of them is, which you would have heard, some of you, is that the Acoris calamus is what was used in the holy anointing oil. I don't believe that's the case because Acorus calamus has actually got a carcinogenic in it called biacerone. It's also a psychoactive, but so are some of the essential oils. There have been books written on essential oils to do with mind-body medicine. Well, there's also been one that's been done on cannabis. Yeah, I'm just mentioning these facts. I'm getting around to it. Yeah, well, some people haven't heard this stuff before, and I don't think you have either.
Give him a go. Let him get to his point.
Isn't it a violation of a human right, naming religious freedoms, if it's actually there in the Bible? The other reason why I believe that it is in the Bible is that the Acorus calamus, not only is it a carcinogenic, it doesn't have the medicinal properties that are necessary for it to have in order to heal the sort of things that this holy anointing oil healed in the Bible, whereas cannabis does.
Thank you.
Excuse me, if
response?
I may, I'm actually a scholar of religion. So this hinges on the translation of a Hebrew word, kana, which is usually translated as sweet cane. There are a number of different plants identified. One of these is cannabis. So cannabis is one interpretation of what kana in the Old Testament is. Sweet flag is another. So really it hinges on how we're going to interpret that. So that's, in terms of that, whether it's in the Old Testament, botanists and scholars are, not quite sure. So.
I'm happy to quickly respond. Firstly, in terms of knowing what's in the drug, and that's why I think we need to regulate it. So actually consumers know what it is they're getting. They're not getting some extraordinarily intense breed of cannabis down the track. And that's part of regulating it. So, and anyone surely wants to know what product they're buying or growing. In terms of the religious freedom, I probably go down the civil liberties track, more the sort of Will's civil liberties track. This is really about stopping people's civil liberties being grossly and continuously violated. And that's the perspective that I suppose my party, the New South Wales Greens, looks at it through.
Thank you. Anyone else at the front? Thank you for that. David.
Hi. Well, I'm going to be talking tomorrow, and hopefully the gentleman will be here and be able to separate fact from fiction. I think it's good that he's here. He raised a lot of myths. I do want to push my book called Drugs Are Not Tools of the Devil, How Greed and Discrimination Led to a Dysfunctional Drug Policy and How to Fix It. We've got it over at the headquarters, and I may talk a little bit about that tomorrow. I was going to ask what I thought was a provocative question, and that was about the personal growing, because in the United States, 1938, they said the FDA has to approve any future drugs. Cannabis was an existing drug. If you're going to sell it. But the fact is, if you're growing your own marijuana, it's a lot like growing any other vegetable. We don't make you test your tomatoes that you grow in your backyard. So I don't know what people are afraid of in terms of allowing people to have rugged individualism. I mean, I take a look at Crocodile Dundee as having being a real person, not just a fictional character. And I'm wondering, do the Australians believe in personal freedom? Do they believe in personal responsibility for their own health? And how does that fit with growing your own?
Bloody oath. Yes, it does fit in. I guess I can tell you all now because it's been chopped down, but I grew a cannabis plant this year for the first time. It sort of feels weird after the last few years of ripping them out of people's homes and dropping carbon filters everywhere and having a good old laugh about it. But it is exactly what you say. I should be able to grow it alongside tomatoes and use the same sort of worm juice and everything I use on all the rest of my veggies and treat it as a vegetable and a nutrient the same way I treat every other vegetable. But that's an education thing. I don't think we're going to get into that until we get past the stigma of the the last few years of prohibition, and then sort of re-educate everybody on the evidence-based science and what the facts actually are about cannabis?
My response would be that I think that policymakers are often choosing between two different options, and often they're not quite conscious that they're doing this. And one option is to try and deal with, to allow things that they can enable to happen. And another options, some of the times they're actually trying to stop things that they haven't got a hope of trying to stop. And you can't stop people who want to grow their own cannabis plants. It's just impossible. And I think sooner or later we'll have to come and recognise that. It's along the same lines that the majority of people are very clear that the majority of people prefer to have sex with someone of the opposite gender. They don't want to have sex with someone of their own gender. But there are a minority of people who do want to have sex with someone of the opposite gender. Fact is, the majority can't stop the minority who want to do that. And we have taken a few decades, maybe a few millennia, to realise the huge costs of even trying to do that. And I think we'll go down the same road, and sooner or later we'll come to recognise that if people want to grow their own plants, they can. My problem with people growing their own plants is when this is being done for medicinal purposes, and where in medicines we do, for good reasons, try and control the quality of those medicines. And by quality, I also mean how consistent the product is from one year to the next, whether it contains rare metals or doesn't contain rare metals, whether it contains dangerous levels of bacteria or fungi, and they're things that in regulated medicines we do try to control for good reasons very stringently, and you can't control those if people are growing their own cannabis as a medicine. And I think if they're using a medicinal product, we should give them the option at least of having a high quality product where there is a great level of safety and a great deal of consistency and knowledge of what the product contains.
Well, I don't disagree with what you said if you're doing this on a commercial basis. And we also require people who grow their tomatoes, if they sell them commercially, they can't have pesticides. I'm talking about individual liberties, and I mean, you don't really care if I grow tomatoes in my backyard if they're full of bacteria. If I don't care. And so the point that you made had to do with the commercial sale and making this available to other people. Everything you said on that, I concur with, but I'm not sure that it applies to growing your own vegetable.
Our party is your life, your choice. So, of course, we have a position that the individual should be able to make that choice, whether it's who you have sex with or when you choose to die. But and obviously in our policy we totally support the notion of being able to grow it at home. And, you know, we've still got a number of states in Australia that do allow that without a criminal penalty. And when you speak to police are not worried about someone growing a couple of plants in the backyard, or certainly the police I speak to, in particular in Melbourne, they're worried about the hothouse that's got 150 hydro plants that's, you know, dangerous about catching on fire and, you know, certainly not looking after the type of product that they're growing as well. I agree with you, it's a completely different thing. Most people buy their tomatoes from the supermarket, but for those of us who want to grow it, we should be able to.
Yeah, look, I appreciate the question, and it raises a really fundamental question of what we that believe in marijuana law reform are asking for. And in any sales situation or negotiating situation, you've got to be careful what you ask for, because you might just get it. So the point is, if we placate in our entreaties to government and people that would have the prohibition continue and ask for a half measure, ask for some decriminalisation, which I first to concede it's better than perhaps the options. If we ask for a cautionary approach where people are given some sort of a ticket or a police caution at the discretion of the police office, we are agreeing with the assumption of the prohibition of a substance, which is basically its consumption hurts no one but the individual. And this gets into the human rights issue, perhaps, the individualistic thing, of human rights. Now, it's not a good argument, perhaps, to push our cause to the wider community, because, as I said in the beginning there, they want to know how these new laws are going to help save their kids for whatever emotional or other reasons. But what we need to be careful for, and I think consistent on, is that, yes, we're certainly asking for the legalisation. I know that's a misunderstood word, and a lot of people in the movement will say, let's argue for decriminalisation. Depending on how you cast them, they're basically the same. But we need to preserve our right to grow a God-given plant, and with deference to our theological friends down the back there, this is the point. It's a bloody plant, that you grow it in your back garden, and then you use it for medicinal purposes, recreational, which would be considered a psychological, a treatment for depression or other ills of the human condition. It's something that we need on a federal level to ask that the legalisation and the personal right to grow certain plants, this will also protect a very important problem in this whole argument, that it will be very quickly taken over by those vultures of big tobacco that are just waiting in the rings and already making entreaties in Colorado to take over the production. And the tobacco story is just a total story of indictment of logical, social policy. The tobacco plant is outlawed to be grown by any individual to protect the monopoly of the tobacco lobby. So there are rules. Now, finish up the point, all I would say is that the likes of Fiona and David, people that are in the parliamentary system, parties like my own Drug Law Reform Australia and the Hemp Party need to be active in trying to codify, or at least putting the research and the facts together of how this legislation should work. And Abe from Colorado and the guys, we're just fascinated to see how it can work, how we can tax this commodity, how we can put money, back into the community, to rehabilitation of those people that do develop drug problems, whether it be an addiction to pot or other things. So, let's go for the whole hog. Let's ask and put a strong argument to government for this thing to be solved.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, everybody. Unfortunately, the time has against us, as always, probably at MardiGrass, and most of these kind of political discussions, wherever you go, on whatever topic, whenever you try to talk about change of the law and change of society and change of politics, never enough time, is there? Look, that's all we have time for tonight on this panel discussion, but the weekend is ahead of us. Thank you to all of the panel members. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, David. Thank you, Damon. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Torsten. Thank you, everyone in the audience as well. I hope today has been useful. I hope today has been, for the whole day, has been terrific. I hope the rest of the weekend will be terrific. The conversation goes on. It's not, we don't have time now to continue, but the conversation will continue. Hate that word. The discussions, the arguments will continue. The points of view, the exchanges of points of view, the differences of opinion will continue all over the weekend. So don't hold back. If you agree with something, say so. If you don't agree with something, say that too. And welcome to MardiGrass. That's what it's all about. We're trying to get some change. Be part of it, my friends. See you around.